a text that will be shown on screen. This text will be up to 300 words, and the time to answer this question is 10 minutes. Since the question asks the test taker to summarize the text, it is important to remember that only the main points should be included. Summaries, by definition, do not need to be too detailed. They need to summarize or recap the key ideas. So only the main points need to be included here. The length of this answer has to be one full single sentence that goes no more than 75 words. This is important to remember. The answer has to be written as one single sentence. It will be a long sentence because it can be up to 75 words, but it cannot be more than one sentence. It has to be one single sentence. This this question type appears 2 times in the test, which means that there are 2 opportunities to score or improve a test taker's score in this area. This is an integrated skills question type, which means it assesses more than one skill at the same time. You might know many PTE questions, many questions in the PTE academic test and the core test as well are integrated skills questions, which means they assess more than one skill because they are quite realistic. Since communication in real life also often happens in these ways. Sometimes we read and write at the same time. Sometimes we speak and listen at the same time. So this question type addresses reading and writing, and the scoring is thus integrated. So the scores will go towards both of these skills. The 4 traits upon which this question type is scored are firstly content, then form, then grammar, and finally vocabulary. But if their answer is relevant and addresses even a partial portion of the scoring criteria, they receive some points for that. So very quickly to recap, summarize written text, as the name suggests, refers to a question type where candidates will read a text and then summarize it within 10 minutes. The key point to remember here is that this summary has to be written in one single sentence. Let's take a look at what this question type looks like. This is an example of what this question type looks like in the actual test. On top, you will see the instructions. It is very important to remind test takers to read instructions carefully. All question types on top first have the instructions. Do prepare your test takers to get into the habit of reading the instructions quickly and first before they start doing the actual answers. This is important because instructions contain important information such as timings or any other factors that are important. For example, here, the keyword is that the summary has to be written in one sentence. They can type their answer in the box at the bottom. It also mentions the timing, which is 10 minutes to finish this task. Now, this question type asks you to read this text and then summarize it in the box at the bottom. This is an example of what the box might look like. I'm going to ask you all to take a few moments to skim through this text, a summary. What are the main points to keep in mind? We discussed this a few minutes ago, which was that summaries require only key points to be addressed. I'd like you all to consider one more time when you are writing a summary and only in one sentence, what are some things to keep in mind? practice this in stages so that or the summary has to be relevant to the text that was given, and it also has to completely summarize it. If the answer is only partially summarizing the given text, it will not be considered an excellent sample. It will be considered a partial response. So, for example, if the main text has 2 or 3 main ideas, the answer has to include all of the main ideas. This is scored on a scale of 0 to 4. Then form, which refers to the word limit. Now, since this has to be done and since content is scored in this question type on a scale of 0 to 4, this is what that looks like. We'll take a moment to go through this rating scale. As you can see, 0 refers to a response that is too short. So anything that's extremely short cannot be considered a sentence and demonstrates no understanding of the text or the prompt will be marked as 0. However, since there is an opportunity to get partial credit, we'll take a look at what 1, 2, and 3 mean here. At a 1, we can see that the response is relevant to the text, which means that the topic has been addressed. However, it is not meaningfully summarized, which means that the summary is not very logical, or the summary is not an accurate summary of the text. It shows limited comprehension, which means that the test taker has not fully understood what the text is about. The response is also composed of disconnected ideas or excerpts, which means that certain words and ideas have been taken from the text, but the test taker has not been able to show any connection or any organization of the same ideas. There's no context or attempt at synthesis. So there has been no attempt to identify what the main points are or to show your own understanding of it. And the main ideas are either omitted, which means they have not been included, or they are misrepresented. By that, we mean that they have either been misunderstood or they have been left out of the answer entirely. And the response is lacking coherence or is difficult to follow, which means that upon reading, it does not make sense. It looks like separate ideas put together. At a 2, the test taker's understanding of the response has improved, as we can see. So the source text now at a 2 means that it has been summarized partially. Again, it's not displaying complete understanding of the text, but there is a partial attempt to summarize it. There's again no major distinction that has been made between the main points and the supporting points or the background details. In any text, it is possible that there are certain things that are the main points and some information that is for context or supporting detail or background detail. A good reader should be able to identify the difference between a main point and a supporting point. It also mentions here that the ideas are identified, but the response relies heavily on repeating excerpts, which means that even if the test taker has understood the text, they have not done any paraphrasing. So a lot of the words and phrases have been copied or used exactly from the text. And repetitive or inappropriate connective devices are used, which means that the connective devices are quite repetitive, which shows limited range of linking words, and the connective devices are incorrect in some places. So this means that the response can be followed, but with effort, which means that for someone who is reading this, it will take a little bit of effort to understand what this means. It's not easily understandable. At a 3, You will see that a lot of new things have now come into the scoring scale as part of the traits. The source text is now summarized adequately, which means it's not completely summarized very well, but it's not incorrect either, or it's not partial. Most so far are these: showing a comprehensive understanding of the text, using paraphrasing techniques effectively, complete synthesis, which means that every part of the text has to be summarized, all the main ideas have to be covered, and skilled connective devices for smooth flow. So these four ideas stand out the most from this scoring scale. I would recommend using these four ideas to create lesson plans, ideas, worksheets, or activities for learners so that they can develop these skills. Also, it is important to keep in mind that these skills are not just required for this question type, they are also required for many other question types. Apart from that, these are all realistic skills that any test taker who is taking the PTE academic test will require when they go into university life. So, in their academic journey beyond the test, these are all skills that will be used on a day to day basis. So, it is really important to remind test takers that these skills are being developed right now so that they can help them in the test. But already, but if there are more, please feel free to add them to the question and answer box. One sentence which is written in one single complete sentence. That would give you 1 point. A zero means that it is not written in one single complete sentence, or it contains fewer than 5 or more than 75 words. Also has to make sure that the summary is not written completely in capital letters, because that is not how sentences are written. So just the first letter should be capitalized. There has to be a full stop at the end. If there's a proper noun in the middle of the sentence, that can be started with a capital letter, but nothing else. Grammar is scored on a scale of 0 to 2. So here that means 0 means there is incorrect grammatical structure, which is not clear. So the communication is not clear or understandable. 1 means that there are some grammatical errors, but overall it is still possible to understand what the sentence is. And 2 means that the correct grammatical structures have been used. For vocabulary, once again, the scale goes from 0 to 2. So 0 means that the word choice is defective, or it's not understandable again, or it's not relevant to the question. 1 means that there are vocabulary or lexical errors, but the overall communication is still possible. And 2 means that appropriate words have been used. So all of these things together should give you a clear picture of how this question type needs to be addressed in the planning and preparation stages. So when you are preparing students, or when your students are practicing for this question type, simply repeating the practice activities, there is definitely benefit to doing practice more and more, but it is also important to first develop these skills. Once the skills have been developed or taught, that's when practice will be useful. Let's take a look at some other questions if we've got them. No, 50 words will not be okay. You've got okay, sorry. It's not compulsory. That is the limit of the sentence that you've got. Do take a moment to look at the score guide. What is an idealistic word limit for an average student? That is difficult to answer, to be honest, because there is no one definition of an average student. And this text also depends on the prompt that is given. So how many main ideas are being discussed in that prompt? Is the student covering all of those points or not? So it's structuring the response. This is where, once again, we're going to look at the task and try to break it down so that we can once again have a clear picture of what this response needs to include. About what is the structure of a summary? What does a good summary look like? A lot of you mentioned some ideas in the chat in the previous session. And I'm going to build upon some of those ideas in this section. I've got this structure of a good summary here, where you can see the first point has been displayed for you, which means that all the main ideas and any important other information can be included, but the minor points cannot be included in a summary because then it will become too long or irrelevant. What would you say would be the next or second most important thing to consider here? Think about the same ideas that we discussed in the beginning. Something like this. So we discussed the first point. The second thing is really important, has to be presented in a logical order. So as someone was asking earlier, does it have to be in a linear fashion? It's not necessarily linear, it has to be logical. If the text has brought a point up, that is important to mention before another point. Sometimes a text might have a cause and effect of something. So something happened and that had an effect on something else. In that case, it's always important to talk about it in a cause effect manner or a problem solution manner. So it has to be logical more than linear. Then it only includes ideas from the text, not your own ideas. So there is no need to add personal opinions or personal ideas to this summary. Summaries anyway mean that it has to be a recap of everything that was in the text. So paraphrasing is all right and it's important, but adding new ideas or adding your own ideas is not recommended. It has to be shorter than the original. Summaries cannot be longer than the original text. By definition, a summary means that it's a concise version of some information. So it has to be shorter and it has to mostly use words that are different from the original vocabulary so that you can show range of vocabulary and how well you are able to understand the text. I'd like to bring you down to this box here and focus your attention here for a moment. These are just some tips that you can keep in mind. Writing a long response. I think this will answer some of your questions that you had earlier. Sentences with the use of coordinating conjunctions. Simple sentences are sentences that consist of the three essential parts of a sentence. So they need to have a subject, a verb, and an object. However, a simple sentence can be too limited sometimes. So to show grammatical awareness or to show grammatical expansion, compound sentences combine two simple sentences with the use of a coordinating conjunction. One of you mentioned in the chat the fanboy structure. Yes, you can absolutely teach that in your classrooms. The fanboys structure is the coordinating conjunction acronym that is commonly used in English. This refers to the conjunctions for, and, nor, but, or, yet. And sometimes there's also an S at the end for so. So compound sentences can definitely be taught. Have a look at the example here. So joining two sentences with the use of a simple conjunction like and. Just-in-time production synchronizes good produce, should be goods produced with demand. And many companies employ this method to control costs. So there were two things that were similar about the same topic. They have now been made into one long sentence. So that is one way of writing longer sentences. Another method of creating longer sentences is to teach non-defining relative clauses. Now, relative clauses refer to the use of relative pronouns. These are pronouns that start with the WH structure. Often we use WH words as question words. So words like who, which, or where are often used to ask questions. but sometimes they are also used to join sentences, to refer to someone else, to refer to a person, we might say who, to refer to a place, we might say where, or to refer to a thing, we would say which. Non-defining relative clauses are additional pieces of information that are introduced or included in a sentence to add more information. Relative clauses are of two types, defining and non-defining. Non-defining relative clauses do not change the meaning of the original sentence. They only add new information. For example, if you're talking about something like this, the discovery of the planet Uranus in 1781 happened completely by chance. Adding a non-defining relative clause would look like this. So you start with the same sentence, the discovery of the planet Uranus in 1781. Now we have the rest of the sentence, but we've added the section in bold, which happened completely by chance. This is an example of a non-defining relative clause. We are using which because we're talking about a thing. The discovery of the planet is a thing, it's a concept. So which is the right relative pronoun to use here? And if you notice, if we remove the section in bold from this sentence, the sentence without it will also still make sense. So you can still say the discovery of the planet in 1781 expanded our understanding of the solar system. And if you remove the relative clause, this original sentence will not change. This is only to add more information. So this is known as a non-defining relative clause. And another method of changing grammatical structure or expanding sentences is to use nominalization. Now, nominalization refers to changing verbs into noun forms so that you can reverse the order of a sentence, and it also helps you expand the sentence. For example, something like this. Some businesses fail to understand customer behavior. Now we take the main verb here and we change that into a noun form. So it becomes the failure of grammar. So these are all things that should definitely be taught. And these are skills that will help them with other writing activities as well. Let's do a quick task to see if we can practice this. I've got some information here for each of these categories. The compound sentences, the non-defining relative clauses, and the nominalization. We have some examples that have been started for you. If you'd like to try, you can put your answers in the chat. You might not want to do all of them. You could try any one of them in the chat. In the meanwhile, I'm going to take a look at any other questions. Great. For example, for the non-defining relative clause, you can add more information. In this case, when you're talking about President Roosevelt, who died in 1945, just before the end of the war, you can also add more information. President Roosevelt, who, if you have some information about the person personally, or like if you know something about them, you can include that information in commas and just put that in the middle of the sentence to add an extra piece of information. So non-defining relative clauses, they don't change the original sentence. They only add more information within the same structure. So you don't have to use two sentences for the same thing. All right. Now, speaking about some mistakes to avoid is essential here because the main passage into the summary is not a good idea. Summaries, by definition, as I have mentioned, have to be shorter than the original text. So it does not require every single point. Yes, adding personal views, definitely not recommended. Second point that we see here, adding any of your own knowledge, your own opinions, your own deductions is not necessary. Writing the summary in more than one sentence because it's very clearly mentioned in the instructions, it has to be one sentence. So there's no need to break the sentence into two, put a full stop, and then write another one. Copying the sentences from the actual text and simply writing and to keep connecting them is also not recommended because it shows very limited understanding. And we saw in the scoring scale that this strategy will not get very high points. And using any memorized responses, anything that you've memorized or a student has memorized before the test will definitely not be relevant to the question prompt and it will receive a very, very low score. All right, let's take a look at a sample response now. This will give it off the text. We are breaking this down into stages because this is how it is recommended to teach candidates as well. Whenever someone is preparing for a test, practicing with the full question is useful, but before anyone gets to the practice stage, breaking the question down or breaking the task down into smaller chunks, into more easy to understand pieces, is a recommended strategy so that they can start developing the skills one by one. Three things. We're going to read the text and identify one main idea and two supporting details. So keep that in mind, one main idea and two supporting details. Here's the text. I'm going to give you all a few minutes to skim through the text. And a lot of you have identified that correctly as well. It talks about how octopuses make decisions independently of their brain. Right. So if you're using a word like sea creatures instead of marine creatures, that's all right because it's showing paraphrasing. So it's not an additional piece of information. You're not adding anything new. You're simply paraphrasing. You're showing your understanding that you know what marine or sea creature means. That's all right. And then we've got supporting details as to what parts they use to make these decisions and how they coordinate this sensory information without any brain input. Now, let's take a look at these sample responses. I have three sample responses here for you, and I'd like you to look at them. Consider for a moment what GSE score or CEFR level they would be at. Here on top, you can also see a CEFR scale, which goes from beginner to native or proficient in terms of English language levels. This is the same scale that the global scale of English or GSE is aligned with. GSE is the 10 to 90 scale on which PTE scoring is done. I'm going to give you all a few minutes to consider these three sample responses and think about the text that you just looked at. What level would you place these, or what mark range or score range would you place these three samples at? European languages, and that's how it's taught globally. C1 advanced level range. This answer includes information from the text clearly, accurately, shows understanding, as you can see. It does not use every single detail, so it has identified the main ideas, and it's written as one clear long sentence where the first letter is capitalized and there is a full stop at the end. It also uses clear connections. It uses relative pronouns. We see that right in the beginning, scientists who have conducted studies. Further, it uses a comma to separate 2 points, then uses the word then to show connection. There's another comma later to make sure that that clause is closed, and further uses a connective word like thus. The vocabulary and grammar and grammar and spelling are all appropriate, so this gets a higher score. The middle response that we see here has been marked in the GSE range of 43 to 58 or a B1 to plus category. We'll talk about what that means as well. Point correctly. It includes the essential supporting information. So we saw that earlier, the information about using the neurons to spread activity without brain input. And we see that here it has been paraphrased. The sentence structure is grammatically correct. So instead of saying without brain input, they say independently of the brain.